Morning. Oh, it's good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum.
Afternoon.
Hi guys.
Good afternoon.
Ah! Ano yan? Ano ba pagkain? Wala nga itlog lang ako. Hindi, wala nga yung gusto ko sana umorder. Excuse me, ma'am. Okay, nakamute, Mama Rotes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Okay. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes. And can you, thank you, and can you all hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Brilliant. Okay. Can I please request each one of you to mute your microphones, please?
Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to mute all now. Ensure that your microphones are mute at all times unless you have a question to ask. If you have a question, then please use the raise my hand feature, okay? Use the raise my hand feature, ask your question, or if you want to share an experience that you think will add value to what we are discussing about. That's when you unmute, or else you ensure that your microphones are muted, okay? Today we are going to study about some definitions, some terms in special needs, what causes or what are the different obstacles to learning, and how learners process information and demonstrate learning. Okay, a very, very important unit. Please make, please keep your books ready, take notes, have your webs, your diagrams, your illustrations done. And also, as I've said earlier, please have at the back of your book terms that you think are new to you, okay, like a glossary of words so that you can refer to when you work on your assignments, and also when you work and when you're on the field, you can use these terms, okay? So some quick reminders here. Please keep your videos on and be attentive. Use the raise my hand feature. Please be active and take notes, okay? So what is a disability? Let me, before I share what I have, I would want you to ask, so what is your understanding when you hear the word disability? What comes to your mind when you hear the word disability? Yes, Hira.
Yes, disability means unable to do something. Means
Unable. Yes.
Unable
Yes.
to do something.
Correct. If I have to look at and break it, so the root word is ability here, okay? And you've just added the prefix dis, that means not being able to, or the inability, yeah? So it is any condition here of the body or mind impairment that makes it difficult for a person with the condition to do certain activities. So it leads to something called activity limitation and interaction with the world around them, that is participation restriction. Okay, so because of this condition, it leads to activity limitation and participation restriction. Okay, however, it's also said because the way things have been designed and the way society works and the way we've considered things as norms and normal is what is the biggest barrier. If we change the way we look at things and the solutions that we have, then everyone will be able to function. Like how we have these different initiatives where we have those paths for blind people. Yeah, we have braille in our lifts. We have in the education system, we have a special needs department. If we have all these in place, then there wouldn't be any disability or activity limitation or participation restriction here. So there are many types of disabilities that affect a person. It could be movement, vision, anything to do with the mind and body, right? So with the mind comes how the brain works, so your cognition, your thinking, remembering, the way you learn, ability to communicate, your hearing again, that's a part of your body, your structural limitations, mental health, social relationships too. So if you look at disability, it has three dimensions. There's an impairment, which could be body structure, okay, or function. So where the structure of the body that does not allow you to, or the function of that part of the body. So if you see everything is normal, but it doesn't function, like if I have to talk about your invisible disabilities, okay, I cannot see a person and say that, oh, I see you have dyslexia because I can see it. Okay, it's invisible. It's how the person's brain works, and that's the reason why it does not allow him to function or do things like any other person who is neurotypical would be able to do it. Okay, so it could be a body structure or function or the mental functioning. Okay, so maybe loss of a limb, loss of vision, memory loss. It could be structural, so your impairment could be, you could branch it out and say structural impairments, problem with internal or external component, or it could be functional impairment, complete or partial loss of function. So you branch it out, and this is how you'd write it. So the second one is because of this impairment, it leads to activity limitation. Okay, so because my brain doesn't function or work, so when I look at script, okay, and if I'm dyslexic, when you look at script and if you're not dyslexic, then there's a part of your brain that starts working, okay, and starts responding to what your eye sees. Now we're also going to learn about how we process information, right? So the moment you look at script, your brain processes that information and leads to the activation of some parts of the brain that are responsible and help you to be. But in a dyslexic brain, those portions or those parts of the brain do not get activated as it would in a non-dyslexic brain, right? So that's something that's causing the disability. So it could be, if it's very apparent, if you're blind, then difficulty seeing, hearing, walking, or even problem solving. Okay, it's the execution of a task or activity by an individual. And participation restriction is participation in. So because of activity limitation, you cannot participate in daily activities like the others do. So it could impact your working, your engaging in social activity, your recreational activities, obtaining healthcare or other preventive services. So participation is a person's involvement in life situations. So special educational needs and disabilities, there's an addition made here, disabilities, and now from SEN, it's become SEND. Okay, this is, so we're looking at all definitions, remember. So this is another definition that we're looking at, a need which occurs when a student or a person is identified with an impairment. Okay, we've seen this is the first dimension here, an impairment, and because of that, he requires the school or the educational institute to make specific accommodations or modifications. Now, that is again based on the disability, or provide specific support. And these accommodations and modifications or supports that you have, the provisions that you'll have, will prevent or remove barriers. If they cannot remove barriers completely, they are going to reduce those barriers. Okay. And then that specific student will be able to access education. If not access education, experience it at least. Like a lot of your level 3 profound needs students, they cannot access what everyone else is doing when it comes to if there's a curriculum that's offered, if there's a syllabus that they're following, if there's specific content that they're learning. They may not be able to learn everything, but they can experience. What they can experience is learning together with their other peers in the same classroom and studying together. Okay, and it has to be on an equitable basis. So there's a change of word. It doesn't say equal anymore, it says equitable. So understanding needs and giving each person as per what their needs are and what they require. And all of this, they say, should happen in a common learning environment with same age peers. Okay, and this definition I've taken from the Dubai Inclusive Policy Framework. This is one book that we all should read and must be aware of. So, disability, a social, what it says in the framework is that a disability, it's a social condition. Like how I said, it's because how society is being designed. This is a specific way or a design way of doing things. There shouldn't be any changes to it. And if that's the mindset we have, that this is how it should be done and no changes, then it leads to disability. So it's a social condition that occurs when an individual with a long term limitation experiences attitudinal, social, and environmental barriers. Okay, a lot of teachers do it. This is how I teach, this is how my students learn. Oh, the presence of a special needs child is really making it difficult for me to teach other children. That's what attitudinal barrier is. Okay, social, where I can't work with a child who is or with a person who has a disability that's very apparent. Okay, I can't include this child or this person into what I'm doing. And environmental, oh, why do I build a ramp? Why do I need to have um, braille buttons in the lift? Why do I have to need to have a different different pathway? So environmental barriers, all of these prevent full and effective participation within the community. And a disability is result of the individual interaction, that individual's interaction with the society. And it's not the attribute. We all are different. God has made us with different strengths, and we have a lot of areas to improve. But if we are judged based on how things are created and how they should be by some individuals, then uh, there are some who are always not going to fit in and are always going to fall out. So it's a mold that society has created. Everyone who should pass through. If you don't fit, then you just fall out. That's exactly what they're trying to say. And an impairment is a medically identified condition or a long term limitation of a person's physical, mental, cognitive, communicative, and sensory function. According to the individuals with disability, special education, also known as special needs education, aided education, exceptional education, or special ed, is the practice of educating students in a way that addresses their individual differences and needs. And now I think this should be the norm. Okay, every education system must ensure that what they have in terms of their pedagogical practices, strategies, um, should address the individual needs of students who come to them and who are enrolled with them. So this process involves where you individually plan um, their learning pathways, and it's systematically monitored to see how they are progressing, what are the barriers, what are the obstacles, and there are specific teaching strategies and procedures. There are adapted equipments, materials, and accessible settings. Okay, so, and it leads to the person reaching higher level of self-sufficiency, and they see themselves succeeding in what they're doing. Okay, so I'm sure we all have, whether diagnosed, not diagnosed, face difficulties in life, right? In doing certain things where we are good at achieving some, and where we need a little support in certain. So we all have, and if I have to give you a minute to think of and share if you've ever faced a difficulty in learning, I'm sure you will say, yes, I have, and this is how it was. Especially when we were taught in, that one size fits all attitude by our teachers, where there's one way of teaching, and the teacher felt that I know it all, I am the one who lead, and this is how I'll teach, and all of you should follow what I have planned. And so we all must have gone through this. So I'm sure you've come across these where it says that the famous Albert Einstein quote, which says that everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. And if you look at this one, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And you see the participants there. Okay, this is exactly what we do in class. If we have to reflect now, right? We have the same test, we have the same teaching resources. When we talk about differentiation, we talk about the 4 elements of differentiation. So if you have to write adaptive teaching or differentiation, there are 4 elements that you always should keep in mind: the content, the process, the learning environment, and the outcomes. Okay, the product. These 4 things. So you always keep analyzing. So if I have the content, that's the what of teaching, what I'm going to teach, I'm going to consider where my children are in their learning by assessing where they are and then planning what I'm going to teach. Now, if I make changes to what I'm going to teach, then I need to make changes to how I'm going to teach that and how I'm going to assess learning. A lot of places, teachers have not started with understanding differentiation, but very selective in what they want to do. I'm going to differentiate. Yes, I know there are 3 levels. I will differentiate for my 3 levels: emerging, expected, and exceeding ones. Okay, I'll do 3 levels, 4 levels, what you tell me. But how do I create assessments to assess these 3? Let me give them the same assessment and see how they do. So that's again what I have put up here on the screen, where fair selection, please climb that tree. So everyone does that, but I haven't taught them how to climb that tree. Maybe I've just taught them how to walk, or how to walk in a straight line, or do something different than the others. So always, for adaptive teaching and differentiation, 4 elements, and your learning environment, your attitude, everything should be considered and kept in mind. What are common barriers to learning in a school? One is the motivation, okay, or the availability to learn. So lack of motivation is a major barrier, especially in children who start believing that they are just not going to be able to, or they're good for nothing, or it's not their cup of tea, or I cannot do it, I've tried enough. Like, we know of a child who has a language barrier. It started with a language barrier. He speaks Russian, okay, and very, very good with numbers, okay. Was working with the EAL team for almost a year, and they didn't see any progress. And they came back to us and they said that, we see this child and he really, really struggles to learn language. Now, one is he's in a school where the medium of instruction is English. Biggest barrier. He doesn't know what's happening. He cannot even make friends because he cannot socialize. 2, he just cannot function and learn symbols and sounds and all of it. Again, the The other day when we went in for an observation, we saw him sat away from the other friends. We observed him in a math class, in a science class, and in an English class. And when we saw him in that English class, we saw his behavior change. He was so anxious. It was so clear that he just cannot process and understand what he was learning. Now imagine this child's socio-emotional state. No friends, doesn't like to do what he's doing, doesn't know what he's doing in class, and is just really struggling. How do you think this child's emotional and his well-being and all of it? So what we felt is that yes, he needs a diagnosis. Yes, we know that he cannot do, but before we address that part of it, it's important for us to address how he feels and what he feels and what he needs and his challenges, his difficulties. So do you think he will have the motivation to learn? Okay. So, and also emotional, the encouragement that they receive. A lot of teachers just, we went into class and the teacher had to be reminded to start the translator. Okay. He didn't know what was happening until then. So the teacher knows that he would need these accommodations to learn, but then sometimes we forget. Okay. So again, encouragement that students receive from their teachers, their parents, friends, it plays an important role. Then physical barrier, environmental barrier, social cultural barrier. I've come from this social background or this cultural background. I'm allowed to do this. I'm not allowed to do a specific thing. If children have difficulties with processing, again, how their brain works, how the neural pathways have been formed, whether they are considered to be neurotypical or atypical, okay, the neurodiversity, product difficulties, the way I process, it's going to have a huge impact on the product, the outcome of what I've processed. So even if I've learned and if I have a disability in the middle or in the process of learning, there's something that has become an obstacle or a barrier. Now my outcome does not reflect because I only have been able to pay attention for a part of what I was learning and I couldn't just complete that. It could be home related, educational system related. This is how we teach. This is what we teach. We cannot change it. Okay. I see this struggle not just in this part of the world, but all over the world, where even in the most advanced countries, this is still a challenge, where teachers, educators, facilitators, the management, they understand needs of children and then build a system that really work towards meeting needs and including them all truly, the true meaning of inclusion. So what are some common special needs? And we have a unit on each one of them. So we study about learning disabilities in detail. There's a full unit. We will learn about developmental disorders. We'll also learn about communication, emotional, behavioral disorders. We have a unit on physical disabilities. I've already mentioned developmental disabilities. So we learn about autistic spectrum, intellectual disability, dyslexia, dysgraphia, socio-emotional disabilities, physical. We have units on these. So these are some common special needs. Students with SEN could have difficulties with some or all schoolwork. Again, depends on the attitudes. So everything that we studied about when we were going through the definition, the attitude, the social environment, all of that plays an important role when it comes to whether they would have difficulties with some schoolwork because they're neurodivergent or atypical, or all schoolwork because of the attitude of the teachers or people who are teaching them. Difficulties with reading, writing, number work, understanding information, social skills, making friends, behaving themselves, all these challenges, difficulties in expressing themselves, receiving information, so receptive, expressive, language communication, understanding what others are saying, difficulties in making friends, relating to adults, difficulties in behaving properly, difficulty in organizing themselves, some kind of sensory or physical need which may affect them in school. GNT, yes, it is a part of the SEN umbrella. Okay, we know GNT is where children have gifts and then they are able to transfer and transform into talents. Okay, intellectual giftedness is the difference in learning. Okay, and can benefit from specialized teaching techniques. We also have children that are twice exceptional, so they have gifts and they have disabilities. Okay, so if we only focus on their disabilities, then their gifts are just buried under somewhere or brushed under the carpet. We don't see that. Oh my God, there's so much here to work on with learning. We have so many children with learning disabilities who are very good when it comes to art and music or leadership domain or in sports and in activities. So really need to find out. So there are different domains. We have a full session on GNT, a very, very interesting one that we go through. So special ed or SEND is opposite to general education. General education is the standard curriculum presented without, but now we are supposed to include, because now inclusion is something that is everyone is focusing on. Students receive special education services, can be enrolled into, and that's what inclusion is all about. It's special education is designed specifically for students with special needs. So we do have special different centers, like if you've heard of Al Noor, if you've heard of the Rashid Center, if you've heard of Sanad Village, specifically for children with special educational needs. Here in Dubai, I'm sure there are many in Abu Dhabi and in Sharjah and other places. I think Manzil is the one in Sharjah. Remedial education can be designed for any student. So when we go through the different waves, okay, you see that remedial education is something that you provide to your level 2 students too. So they may not have a disability, but they have this gap in their learning because of other factors, okay, which may have led to a learning difficulty. You provide remedial education and you help them bridge that gap, okay? So that could be remedial, and then we need to look through the response to intervention tiers and what it means. So this is how it looks. Now we'll go through the smaller pyramid before we go through this inverted one, okay? And we will go through it again when we do our IEPs and early intervention and how referral works, okay? So we'll go through this pyramid again. But if you look at the 3 tiers, this is the the tier system that we use. It's also called waves or levels, okay? The tier 1, okay, the larger portion here is your is where children benefit through quality first teaching or core class instruction. Okay, so you're 80% of children. So when you have a referral made, you know that this child has a gap in learning or needs additional support or scaffolding to learn better. They're tier 1 with teacher support. They will be able to work with other peers in class. So if I have to look at how the different levels in class are made, if I have the exceeding, expected, and emerging, they would be in their emerging category a little lower, and with some more scaffolds and differentiation, they'll be able to work. As a special needs educator, children who are registered under level 1 on the inclusion register, I would work with the teachers closely. I would help them prepare quality first teaching lessons. I'll give them a profile page of the student and help them understand what their needs are, their strengths, their challenges. We would look at their assessment scores together. So as a part of their profile, I would have their CAT4 scores, I would have their achievement test data, internal scores, their reading levels if I have, and then we'll analyze all of this and then discuss strategies or ways that we could support them, accommodate them better. So these children, level ones, work with accommodations. You don't need to make big changes to what you're doing. You just need to add a few more steps, few more scaffolds to accommodate well, right? And through your quality first teaching, you'll be within that quality first teaching, you'll be able to support these. So those are your tier one, your 80% off from your, a lot of your tier ones wouldn't even need to stay on your register for a long period. If you know that the teacher is managing them well, then they can be a part of, and the teacher is doing a good job, and you can focus on your tier 2 and tier 3. Your tier 2, again, remember one thing about the tiers or the levels of this pyramid is that this pyramid is the need-based pyramid, not a diagnosis. So it's not based on whether you have a report or whether you have a diagnosis or whether you have a formal evaluation. It is based on the needs of students. And that's determined when you use data. Data informs you about what support they would need, whether they would need anything beyond what you already, whether they would need anything additional or different from what they're already receiving. So your tier 2, as per they could be dyslexic. You could have dyslexics in level 1, 2, okay, with the diagnosis. You could have your ADHD in level 3, or you could have an ADHD in level 1. You could have your autistic in level 1, okay, or in level 3 or in level 2. So nothing to do with your diagnosis. Level 2 children, you know that they would need some pull out or push in sessions. So in your pull out sessions, you work with them in small group. Okay, small groups, you work with them, you give them one-to-one or small group instructions, you do some pre-teaching, some reteaching. If you think that they have some social skills issues, then you do a social story, a social skill reminder, a contract, an agreement, something that you have agreed upon. You do those reminders, you work with them. We used to call these sessions booster sessions too. Okay, call them out. Okay, give them what they need, push them back. Okay, when you go back with them in class and you do the push in, that's where you analyze how, if the child is being able to transfer and translate what you've taught them back into the class. So for example, if I'm teaching spellings and if I've used a specific strategy, or if I'm working on written expression, writing, okay, so if I've used the COP strategy, capitalization, organization, punctuation, and spellings, I've done the COPs. I'm going to write this abbreviated word on the desk, okay, and when I go in for my push in, I'm going to tap and tell the child, check your spellings, check COPs, okay. So I will check in my push in whether they are able to transfer what I've taught back. So in my small group sessions, I'm doing the pre-teach, reteach, reminding them of their agreements, contract. Like yesterday, I sat with a boy who has severe behavior concerns. He just cannot control his impulses. He is on the autistic spectrum, extremely intelligent. Okay, he can do anything and everything, and he's even beyond his class. So again, the twice exceptional. But I had to call him because he comes to my office for both his breaks, his short and long. He went to the counselor to complain and say, I don't want to be in her room during breaks. I want to be with my friends. So I said, okay, fair enough. If you want to be with your friends, let's work on an agreement. We sat and we wrote. So it need not be a fancy document that you work on always. We sat and we made an agreement. You have your short break, you have your long break. You sit with us for your short break. I'm going to give you 20 minutes from your long break to spend with your friends. Okay? If you manage to go there, behave yourself and do what's expected, control yourself for a week, then you can spend all your short breaks in class as a reward. If you don't, then you spend all your breaks again for the next week with us. So this is what I did in my pull-out session. It's not always about, but he falls into the level 2 category. We did not put him as level 3 because it's not that severe, right? So just an example. So you do all of that, targeted support, small group instructions, and then your level 3 becomes your 5%, okay, approx 5 to 7%. Your level 2 is your 15% and the 5% there. The ones who need intensive intervention. Now remember, your modified curriculum, your alternate pathways are for your level 3s. Okay, they must have, because you know these are the ones who are working 3 to 4 levels below. Okay, and need intensive care. These are the ones who have individual learning support assistants working with them. Okay, they will need a significant amount of support, interventions, provisions. Now, all these children listed in your register must be known by all educators, your management, and you must have provisions for these. Okay, however, you know that based on their needs, whether they are level 3, then this is what they need, level 2 and level 1. Okay, on the other hand, if you look at the special needs cascade of services, it is the other way. Yeah, so it begins from at the top. If you see the broader part of it, okay, is your mainstreaming and integration. If you look at the arrows on the side, it says from severe to mild. How it works in mainstream is from mild to severe. Okay, that's how it works. That's the difference. So severe to mild, degree of exceptionality, from the most restrictive environment to the least restrictive environment. That's your mainstreaming. Okay, so for example, if you have a child who has an intellectual ability or quotient of 45 or 40, okay, very, very low, they may need to be in the most restricted one-to-one setup, taken care of. They have other comorbidities, so they have medical conditions, all of it, so they will need to be in a very restricted environment. Okay, but then you have your students who may be who may have Down syndrome. Okay, we know they have an intellectual disability, but it's somewhere around 70, 75. They can be a part of mainstream. They need to be on the level 3 in your mainstream, will need significant support, one-to-one, all of it, but they can still be part of your mainstream. So they can be with their peers. They will need an alternate pathway where they're learning. When it comes to academics, would be a different stream where what they're learning is different, but socially and other things that children do, they can be a part of. So it moves from the most restrictive to the least restrictive. Okay, and if you see from residential school, hospital to special day, special class, mainstreaming and integration. Okay, early signs and early intervention. We know that early signs and early intervention and early sign, early identification is like key to success. And when we have to identify, we always focus on the 4 domains. Here they're broken down further into 7, but you need to keep in mind your 4 domains. Okay, just make a grid and put your 4 domains there for you to remember. Your socio-emotional, your physical domain, your communication and language, and your cognitive domain. 4 domains. How do we remember it? We make a grid and we write the 4 domains in there. Why? Because I am extremely visual. Even if I close my eyes, I know where I place the 4 domains and what the 4 domains are. Okay. Whenever you assess children who have been referred, you assess the 4 domains before you assess anything. Socially, so you go there, and the best way and the most effective tool to assess children is through observations. You go in class, you check your socio-emotional. How are they socializing? Do they follow instructions? Do they have friends? Is there a language barrier? How do they communicate? How are they physically? Everything, all my 4 domains covered. Cognition is all about the act of knowing. If they're responding well to the teacher, of course, then the cognitive functions are working well because they're responding, they're listening, they're processing, doing all of it, right? So I'm going to assess those before I assess literacy and math and other academic areas. If these are functioning well, then a child, there could be other factors that are leading to him not being able to achieve well when it comes to academic learning, right? So whenever you assess, early intervention and early identification should be in these 4 areas or the 7, and then you will flag the ones who have concerns or are at risk. So I think I have spoken now for an hour already. Let's reflect on this slide. What do you see here? Okay, what do you see in this picture? And what does this tell you? What does this picture tell you? Student asking for help. Okay, we need to raise our hands. Okay? And read the bubbles to understand. Chaitra. Go ahead, Chaitra.
I feel like it's a teacher's dilemma and issues that she's dealing with within a class. There's a lot of things to deal with, and it feels like she or he is running short of time and a lot of things to do.
Correct, absolutely. This picture reminds you, and if you go back to the definition, the attitudinal, the environmental, the social, okay? This is how teachers feel. Zehra, what would you like to add to this, Zehra?
Yes, ma'am, exactly as you have said that it is like a portrait of a teacher that many things going in her mind, that I have given lots of time, I don't have time, like how to manage the schedule.
Yes.
And how to deal with I don't have enough resources, that how could I deal with that special child, like all those dilemma which is going in on her mind.
Yes, yes. The dilemma, yes, of what do I do? How do I do it? Ali, what would you like to add to this? You're muted.
Who say it shows a struggling teacher, a teacher struggling.
A teacher struggling, yes.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I meet teachers, I tell them, because I feel bad, I tell them it's very easy said than done. Okay, I'm going to come and tell you 10 things of how to make it better, but if I stand there in your position, I know it's not easy, because I have been a teacher before, becoming a special needs educator. So I understand. Tanzila. Tanzila, you're muted if you're speaking.
I'm sorry, I wanted to swear, but my kid is making noise. I cannot.
No, that's not right. No.
Okay, it's like the person is stressed out, unorganized, anxious, having so many things and not, organize things, and so he's more stressed out.
Correct. So this is a teacher, and if you remember a few minutes ago when I was speaking on the norms and this is how things should be, I don't have enough time. Why? Because I need to teach using the text. I need more training. I have always been successful teaching this way. I don't have enough resources. I need to teach to the test. Oh my God, whatever I do, but the test remains the same. I might lose control of the class. I think this is the biggest one. Like, where they just feel that they're going to lose control and they're not going to be able to, and that's how they weigh or they measure success. Okay. Zainab, what would you
thank you for the opportunity. So as everybody said, it is a dilemma, 100%. But I feel it's something that also should teach us how to prioritize the need of the hour, because sometimes what happens is all of these things are always going through our head. But if I would look it into trying to put this in a positive perspective, is that this actually is a sort of tell us to sit back, sit down, have a look, and prioritize what you need. Do you need the resources at that moment, or would you need a further training? So, I mean, I really like this picture, because I feel like what everybody said, if I were to reflect on it, I think I need to sit down and think about, all right, what do I need at that moment to help my students?
Correct. And Zainab, we have a full unit where we discuss about what do teachers, how do we plan, for these.
All right, that's amazing.
And yeah, and also, so because I remember I did a training, so we had a training called cat nap. Okay, a cat can nap for 15 minutes at a stretch. Okay,
Right.
so just 15 minutes. And I remember training teachers on differentiated and adaptive learning in 15 minutes. So I had a board, okay, a whiteboard, a big one, and I had a teacher illustrated. I'm good at illustrating. So a teacher on a one wheel cycle. So is that what it's called? And
Yes.
a lot of things. So laptop in one hand and this in one hand, and how do I differentiate? And the first thing about differentiating, and everything that you've said, is knowing your learner. I think that's where you start. So if a teacher looks like this, that means there's something that is not allowing her to understand what she needs to prioritize, as you said. I don't know what I need to do, what resources I need. If I am using data, okay, if your decisions are informed by the data that you have, and if you have a fair understanding of your learners, then you'll be able to manage your stuff better. Okay, and that's where you need to begin from. And only after we speak about that and how you can build your individual profiles of students, how do I analyze data, how do I use data that is such a rich resource. Of course, not rely on it completely. Your observations also are one part of it. But then how do I analyze all of it and then plan how I would report them and the differentiation, the four elements of differentiation. But this is what, if you are a special needs teacher in a mainstream school, this is how your teachers are going to be. Now remember, you're going to be the advocate, right? You are the one who's always going to tell them, oh, this is my child. Would you please help my child by doing this? And your teacher is always going to look like this. And I had a meeting with my team yesterday. I said, don't tell teachers what to do. Show them. Okay? Give them an example. Do it. Right? The moment you start telling teachers, this is exactly how they look. And then there's always going to be this struggle, power struggle. I told you this, you told me this. Although in my first session with the teachers, I told them, and I keep reminding them, that when you enter that door where you have your name, Miss Asha's class or Miss Zainab's class, all children in that class are your students. Whether SEN, whether EAL, whether children with medical needs, they're all your children. You're responsible. But sometimes when we are special educators and when we work with these teachers, you need to help them understand. Like, for example, we are spending so much time, investing so much time to learn how learners process information. I know it's a part of your BF training, your teacher's training, but I'm not sure how many teachers remember it. So you need to then help them understand these children better and plan and demonstrate and show them how it's done, right? So you will have these challenges, okay, but you need to not tell them what needs to be done. You need to show them, and that's where you'll utilize all the knowledge and everything that you gain from these trainings and having worked with, or that understanding that you develop of these children. So moving to how learners process information and demonstrate, how each one of us, how we process information. So how do we process information? No, sorry, wrong question. How do we, what's the first step? Okay, how do we gather or collect information from our environment? How do we as humans, we gather or take in or collect information from the environment? Samra. Observation. Through observation.
Observations
Okay,
and
yeah,
recording.
of course. Not us. So I'm not talking about how do we process information. Before we process the information, how do we take in that information as humans? We're talking about the information processing. Yes, Tanzila.
Okay, I was about to say the same thing as Samra, but I think you need to elaborate the question. Like when we are just after observation, what process?
No, we're not. No, we're not talking about that. Sachit. Let me see if Sachit is answering. Yes. You're muted, Sachit.
Yeah, ma'am. Sorry about that. Through our sensory organs, we are gathering all information.
Yes, we're talking about the sensory processing model. We take in information through our senses, all our senses. Vestibular, proprioception, and all the other five senses that you're aware of. Okay? Now, we as humans, we have the ability to select, okay, to filter, and to take in what we want to. Like right now, okay, you are attending this session. You're using your visual, auditory sense, right? You are watching different slides, you're watching me speak, and also you are listening to what I'm saying. Additionally, you may hear some sounds, like in my background, I can see somebody talking, I can see cars moving, all of it, but I know that I need to focus on, okay, the input, okay, and I need to filter and focus on that. So we use all our senses to take in information, okay. I want you to think of children with needs and disabilities, okay. Write down in a corner children with ADHD. Just write ADHD and information processing. Autism and information processing. Remember, autistic children, even if you've not studied and if this is your first session, I'm sure each one of you knows slightly about these, right? Autistic children, high sensitivities. Okay. Dyslexic children with learning disabilities and information processing. And you will see, because of these disabilities, how the processing is interrupted. Will you be able to get the outcome? And what is it that leads to those kind of outcomes? So the reason that I'm making you write these is, while we are going through the information processing, you have to think of how an ADHD child processes, or how an autistic child processes. What are the barriers? What are the obstacles? And why do we see that despite of having a lot of abilities and capabilities and doing things, they still cannot achieve or meet the expectation that we have? Okay, so incoming information. There's incoming information. I use all my senses, and I take in the information. The information remains in my sensory memory for not more than for around 9 seconds and more. Okay. Now, when it's in my sensory memory, I attend to it. I attend to what? So you're attending to what I'm saying, and you're ignoring and filtering what's happening around. So you attend. Whatever you attend is then pushed to your short-term memory. It's also called your working memory. Okay. Now, what you hear, you encode, or you make sense of. So I'm speaking in a language that you understand, right? So you can understand, you can make sense of, it remains in your short-term memory, you rehearse it. What your brain also does is it starts making connections. It starts making connections to what you know about, your prior knowledge. When you start connecting to what you know and what's coming in, you can retain better. That is the reason when you learn something new, it's difficult for you to remember, right? But if something that you know already, or if you can quickly associate something with your with an experience, you will be able to remember. So there's a lot of encoding that happens when the information is in your short-term working memory. So a lot of maintenance rehearsal happens there. Now, It then moves forward to your long-term memory. And then there's retention that takes place. If there's encoding failure, you forget. If you don't make sense of the information, you forget. Okay? And when it's moved to your long-term memory, it's stored for a longer period of time. It is forgotten if there's retrieval failure, if there's decay, that means there's information that you've not used over a period of time. It's just erased off. But then if you have made those associations, if you've encoded them well, then you can retrieve it whenever it's required. Okay? And that's how you build knowledge. And that's how you increase in cognition, like in the sense that you know, the act of knowing, you know what needs to be done in different situations. This is how information is taken in. If I have to think of a child with ADHD, sensory memory, there are so many things that he's focusing on, okay, where you have the ability to filter, to process what's required. Here there's no attention, or there's hyperactivity. He's missed what he had to listen. There's a science lesson that he's attending, teacher is talking about photosynthesis. Okay, she's just started talking about, she's showing some videos. My attention has been just grabbed or taken away by something else that's happening. I have missed what the teacher said. We've moved to something else. I've missed a big chunk of what I should have known to be able to, write maybe work on a worksheet or write a summary about photosynthesis. Right? I really don't know. I know the first part of it, but I've missed it. An autistic child in your class, okay? You are using videos with sound, with too many pictures, it's too overwhelming. Or if the class is into an experiment, working on an experiment, doing something, it's too much for the child to focus on. Again, the whole processing, it breaks in the middle. A child who is dyslexic, okay, information processing, you've given them a big page, a printed script to read from. What happens? Information, because the information that you take in again goes in, and then I told you that the brain starts working. There are portions of the brain that gets activated, and then the links are made. The brain starts processing everything and connects it to your prior knowledge. A child who is dyslexic, what stage of processing does he? Maybe at the working memory, he cannot make sense of, he cannot encode. And if he cannot, then it doesn't move to the long term. You see how disabilities work, and that's the reason why you need to ensure that when a child if there is an input that makes sense. So along with a reading material, if I give a dyslexic learner something that reads aloud, okay, would make more sense. He will be able to process that better than what he would if it's just a written script. Okay, so I wanted to make these connections so that you understand the reason why these children have difficulties. Okay, you just watch a video to help you understand how processing works. Okay.
Thank you so much for watching this video. The topic is on the information processing theory. Remember that the best way to study is to create practice tests, and if you can't find good practice tests, build your own using the Learn My Test study tool. It's absolutely free at www.learnmytest.com. You can also check out our growing list of test banks for tests in your field of study. Thank you again for watching the video. The information processing theory is based on the principle that your brain is kind of like a computer. Short-term memory is the processor, and long-term memory is the hard drive. Short-term memory is what you're aware of at this very second. So if you're watching this video, my voice right now and the picture on the screen is in your short-term memory. On average, you can hold about 7 digits of information in your short-term memory. So really, your short-term memory does not hold a lot of information. The capacity is very small. On the other hand, your long-term memory holds a ton of information. In fact, everything that's ever happened to you in your life is stored in your long-term memory. The process of taking a memory from your short-term memory and storing it into your long-term memory is called encoding. And the process of taking an old memory from your long-term memory and bringing it to your consciousness or your awareness or your short-term memory is called retrieval. There are certain wavelengths of light that we cannot see, and because we cannot see them, they're not going to come into our consciousness or a short-term memory. There are also certain sounds that are so quiet that we won't hear them, or we'll only hear them 50% of the time. And so in order for information to enter our short-term memory or our consciousness, it has to be detected by our senses. This is called sensory memory. Sensory memory for visual information or vision is called iconic memory, while sensory memory for auditory information is called echoic memory. Your short-term memory does not hold a lot of information, like I said previously, so it can get overwhelmed when it experiences lots of sensory information all at once. The process of filtering out all that information so only the important information gets into your short-term memory is called selective attention. Selective attention allows you to ignore noises in the library while you're trying to write a big term paper. People with ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder often have trouble with this filter of selective attention, and the unimportant stuff tends to make it into short-term memory, which makes it difficult for them to concentrate and finish tasks. People wanted to know with selective attention, can you pay attention to more than one visual or auditory task at a time? The dichotic listening task is a study where the experimenters gave people headphones and played two stories in their ear at the same time, telling them to focus on story A while ignoring story B. The goal was to see if they would still pick up or remember anything from the story that they did not pay attention to. The results were that most people did not remember the story in the ear that they did not pay attention to, except maybe the gender of the speaker, which suggests that people may struggle to focus on more than one auditory task at a time. However, we can do a visual task and a separate auditory task at the same time without any problem. This explains why we can drive a car, a visual task, and talk on the cell phone, an auditory task, at the same time without any problems. This led researchers to come up with a different conceptualization of short-term memory called working memory that includes a component for auditory information called the phonological loop and a component for visual information called the visuospatial sketchpad. So let's break it down. You have sensory memory, that is what your senses detect in your environment. Sensory memory for visual information is iconic, while sensory memory for auditory information is echoic. Sensory information goes through a filter called selective attention that removes unimportant information from your environment so it does not reach your short-term memory. Information that goes through selective attention makes it to short-term memory. Researchers came up with this idea called working memory, which is short-term memory with a visual component, the visuospatial sketchpad, and an auditory component, phonological loop. Once information makes it to short-term memory or working memory, it gets stored into long-term memory through a process called encoding. Long-term memories can be brought to our consciousness or short-term memory or working memory through a process called retrieval. Thank you for watching this video. If you're in a psychology course and enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button.
Yeah, good video, right? Really helps us understand the whole processing well. Let's move to processing disorders. Okay, so we know now that we learn about this world through our senses, and we use all the information that we take in through the senses into the brain, and then the different areas of the brain, and only if the different portions or the parts of the brain are functioning well, they will interpret the information and make sense of it. Okay, so we use this new knowledge or this new information, if it is new, and connect it to our existing knowledge or prior knowledge. Okay, and then we process it and store it and respond by some kind of output. We always need to complete. So how is communication completed? When you always get that response, right? So when you respond, that's how the outcome, and that's how we understand that whatever we have processed, we made sense of it, and that the outcome or the output is evidence of it. So it could be writing, language, or action. Information processing deficit, where you take in information, processing, comprehending the information, and output translating into actions. Information is processing disorder. It is a deficiency in the person's ability to use this information the senses have gathered. I have made you write down 3 disabilities, right? Autism, ADHD, and what's the third one?
Dyslexia.
Yes, dyslexia. Learning disability. Let's look at any kind of learning disability. Okay? Now, that's where the ability of the person, okay, to use this information that they've gathered, because of the way their brain works, there is a barrier there is an obstacle there, and they cannot process and use the information to create that desired output of what's required. Okay, so it's not a result of processing disorder, is not a result of hearing loss, impaired vision, attention, ADHD, or any kind of intellectual. Now here we're talking about only processing. Okay, there may be difficulties in processing because of a disability, and on its own also some children only have processing disorder. Okay, 2 important critical areas are visual processing and auditory processing. Okay, disorders in one or several of these can affect academic success. So we will look at visual processing, we're going to look at auditory processing, and how a lot of these dyslexic children, okay, because of the way they process information, and the difficulties, a lot of these symptoms overlap. So a lot of times children only with visual processing are diagnosed, or they seem to have dyslexia. We look at the difference here for you to understand this better. But let's look at visual processing and auditory processing. Now, if complex cognitive functions are not working correctly, many areas of learning and function are disrupted. And we need to provide their proper accommodations and modifications or alternate ways of presenting what they're learning for them to make sense of it. Like when I said, if a child who's dyslexic, it's not the way his brain processes, it's not problem with processing, it's the way the inputs are being given that is leading to it. Okay, so we need to provide proper accommodations and modifications or alternate presentations for them to be able to learn. So information processing disorders are not often named as specific learning disabilities. They are seen in many individuals with learning disabilities. And that is because of the way they're presented with the material, or they're presented with learning. If the input is correct, then they will still be able to process it. So they don't have a processing difficulties. But some children have processing difficulties, okay? And we go through that. The inability to process information effectively can lead to frustration, low self-esteem, social withdrawals, and especially when they have speech or any other comorbidities like speech language impairment. So teachers, educators should learn to recognize what these processing problems look like in class. So we go through visual processing, ability that we have to visually discriminate. We use a sense of sight and notice and compare the differences okay, looking at the features of things, and distinguish. Now this is used when we are reading, okay, that means different letters or colors, shapes, patterns, numbers, the ability to discriminate and distinguish between things that we see, okay, that's visual discrimination. Then we have visual figure ground, discriminating a shape. So for example, if I give you many letters and I say circle all the letter A, or if I give you numbers and I say circle the letter. You remember we did that activity where there's a picture and you need to find out differences. Okay, circle only the differences. Or circle 5 differences between 2 pictures. That's figure ground. Okay, or can you find all animals or all fish or something specific from a picture? So that's figure ground, where you have the ability to discriminate or look at a shape or a print from its background. This ability helps you find specific information. So for example, in a printed page, if you're looking at specific words, or if you're looking at specific information that you find out, you will use this ability. Visual sequencing, ability to see and distinguish and order the symbols, words, or images. Okay, so reading a paragraph. While reading a paragraph, you see a child skips lines, reads the same line over and over again, reversing, misreading letters, numbers, words, understanding math equations. Visual motor processing, to be able to coordinate. So use what you see using your visual sense, process it, and then coordinate your motor movements accordingly. So using feedback from the eyes to coordinate the movement of the other parts of the body. So this helps in visual motor coordination, helps in a lot of activities. Anything that you see and you use your other parts of the body to do, then that's where your coordination works. So writing within the lines, copying from the board, moving around without bumping into things, different activities like catching a ball, throwing things in a specific place like playing basketball, playing table tennis, cricket, all of this. Any precise movements, that's where your visual motor processing works. Your visual memory is looking at things and then being able to store it into your visual memory. So there are 2 kinds. There's a long-term visual memory, okay, ability to recall something seen some time ago, and then short-term is ability to remember something seen recently. So your familiar words, spellings, all of that you can retrieve. Okay, your sight words that you cannot break phonetically, how letters and their orientation, your numbers, also your formulas. So it is also used using a calculator, keyboard with speed, accuracy, remembering phone numbers, all of those. Visual closure, the ability to know what an object is when only a part of it. So if I show you half part of a vehicle, you know the other part is, this is how it looks. Or half butterfly, you know how the other half looks. Okay. So recognizing a picture of familiar objects from the partial image. Okay. Recognizing a face or a picture, and you know that there are some parts missing, you can draw it and say, I know what this is. So that's visual closure, because again you're retrieving it from your long term and you've seen it before. So that's something that you do. Processing area, again, your auditory, your spatial relationship, understanding how objects are positioned in space to oneself. It's also called your proprioception. Okay, your sense of self, where you are in regard to other things around you. Okay, and this sense helps you to not bang into things, or when you've seen a chair and you want to go and sit on it, you don't have to always keep watching the chair. You know where it is and you can go and place yourself on it. So that's how an understanding of distance, near, far, all of it. So getting to know one place to another, spacing letters, all of that will help that will use the skill of spatial relationship. Then auditory discrimination, notice, compare, and distinct separate sounds. Okay, very, very important, vital skill for reading. Okay, to be able to discriminate, because when you're learning phonics, that's what you learn, symbols and sounds, grapheme, phoneme association, letters visually and sounds, how they sound out, and then you blend sounds together to make. So it's a very, very important skill for reading. Auditory figure ground, to be able to, so if I call out your name, or if many names are being called out, you know that's my name. Ability to pick out important sounds from a noisy background. Auditory memory, again, two types: long-term auditory memory, to remember something heard. Short-term, recall something heard very recently. Auditory sequencing, ability to understand and recall words or numbers. Order, okay, and all of these, if you see that if children have not developed these skills, or then they will have difficulties when they're working in class, staying focused on auditory information, following verbal directions, recalling stories and songs, remembering correct order of a number of series, so on. These tests, if you look at a few tests, standardized tests, then auditory processing, visual processing is a part of it, to see how children process information, or if that's a difficulty which is leading them not to learn. So a lot of assessments to understand and gauge difficulties when it comes to learning, these are a part of as subtests in those in the different battery of tests. So auditory processing disorder is where you see a child has trouble following conversations, doesn't enjoy listening to music, finds it hard to understand, people in crowded environments, difficulty remembering spoken instructions, finds it difficult learning songs, unable to pinpoint. Now you may see this and you may see a lot of autistic children have these difficulties. Now that's autism, because of which he's finding it difficult. It's not auditory processing. It's because of autism. Like how we said that because of dyslexia, so there are some children who find it difficult to process sounds and symbols. Okay, it's not because of the visual processing deficit. It's because of dyslexia. So you know the condition and that's causing it. But here, this child does not have autism, does not show other traits of autism, but only has auditory processing. It's only when it comes to his hearing, his auditory sense, nothing to do with his visual sense or his social skills or his behaviors, or he has repetitive behavior, nothing to do with that. It's only his ability to process when he uses his auditory sense, right? That's the difference when it comes to other disabilities, and then it comes along with other disabilities and only auditory processing. Visual processing, again, in children, preschool, unable to focus. Now, again, visual processing, anything that they use their visual sense for, okay, appears to be clumsy, finds it hard to learn. In grade school, a lot of troubles with writing, struggles with writing on a line, copying from the board, finds it difficult to read, loses place when reading, often complains about being tired, bored when reading, unable to use fine motor skills, especially when he needs to cut, zipping, buttoning, other tasks, does not seem to understand math, confused with mathematical symbols, copies it incorrectly. Middle school, again, with all these, they do learn to, as they grow and mature, they learn a lot of ways to cope, okay? But you will still see that they have difficulties remembering things, forget phone numbers, of people who she should be, misspells regular words and familiar words that they know, spelling patterns, struggles to look up for information from something, navigating directories, completing book quizzes, gets lost regularly, prone to getting lost. There is a myth that dyslexia and visual processing disorders have the same symptoms. That's a myth. Individuals with dyslexia struggle to connect letters to sound. Remember the letters to sound. Those with visual processing disorders struggle to understand anything that they take in visually, any visual input, whether it's letters, shapes, or objects. Okay, so the difference between dyslexia and visual processing, I found this very interesting and would help you understand easy. By Kate Kelly. She said that dyslexia and issues with visual perception might seem that they go hand in hand. Of course, children or people with visual processing will have difficulties reading too, okay, or anything, because they're seeing. They need to be able to interpret and they need to be able to understand the letters and symbols. So they will have problems, but that does not mean that it's dyslexia, because they'll have problems not just with letters but also with numbers, with shapes, anything that they see. Okay, dyslexia involves trouble processing language. It causes difficulties with reading, writing, and other skills. Visual processing, trouble with processing information the eyes sees. Okay, so if it's a child with visual processing is reading, then you know that will have troubles processing words they see on a page, because again they're using their visual sense. And that is why some people it may seem and confuse it as dyslexia. So we know what dyslexia is. Affects the way the brain processes language. It's not a problem with vision. Neither is visual processing a problem with vision. It's not that you wear glasses and it's gone away. Not corrected with glasses. Okay, it's the way how your brain processes information, and it's something to do with the wiring of your brain, both of them. It's not because of your ability to see. Okay, kids with dyslexia struggle with language base, so sounding out words, recognizing commonly seen words. Okay, it can also then translate and transfer into writing, spelling, and speaking. Everything to do with sounds and symbols. On the other hand, here um, it is issues having trouble making sense with anything they take in through their eyes. Okay, just give me a minute, please. Yeah. Okay, so there are different types of visual processing issues. Trouble telling difference between size and shape, color, objects, confused about written symbols, difficulties judging distance, poor spatial awareness. Signs that you may notice: dyslexia and dysgraphia, here with reading, sounding out letters, understanding what is read. It's more about reading. They will avoid reading aloud, they will have trouble with spelling, again, may have trouble with grammar, everything that is associated with and connected to reading, comprehending, and all of it. But here, if you see visual processing lacks interest in movies and watching, anything to do with visually seeing and processing, distracted with too much visual information, often bumps into things, any activity with catching, kicking, where it needs visual coordination. Remember all the visual processing skills required. Anything to do with all of these, yeah. Discrimination, figure grounds, visual sequencing, visual motor processing, visual memory, visual cruiser, they will have difficulties with all of these. Ignores signs in math, sloppy job with visual tasks, cannot remember basic facts, skips words entire life. Of course, it will have, and both of them have possible socio-emotional impact, where they both struggle academically, okay, and that will impact the self-confidence. Okay, and they find it hard to fit in socially because you know, if they're not supported, and if they're not, like a lot of children with visual difficulties or visual processing difficulties, if it's clubbed with auditory, okay, they will be able to make sense of it better. Okay, so text to speech, or listening comprehensions would work, right? So we need to find alternatives. If not, then they will start believing that they cannot do. So disabilities do impact children socially and emotionally. Therapies and approaches with dyslexia, of course, intensive um, reading and intensive therapies work. Also, whole word reading works with dyslexia. We have a full unit here where we study about and know how they can learn. And with visual processing, various strategies, again using auditory more on an alternative would help. Maybe reading strips to help them be on task and understand. Um, there are other things also, but of course they're still in the researching, and it's still in development. Where a child may work with developmental optometrists, occupational therapies, neuropsychologists. Okay, there's something about vision therapy. Some parents opt. Okay, but not all of them are scientifically valid. Okay, now there's so much that I hear about autism and different things that are suggested, but parents, and you, before you suggest anything to parents, you should ensure that you know about it, you've read about it, it's scientifically proven, it has some basis to it, some theory that it is related to, and what you're asking parents to do has some solid ground and not just what you've heard. Accommodations, we know all of these for dyslexia. I'm not going to dwell deeper into that, but for visual processing, spoken as well as written, somebody who can be a scribe, a note taker, visual presentations that are described out loud. So anything that's a picture, then auditory, audio, visual. Okay, handouts with simple directions and images would help. Not too much of written because that can overwhelm. Um, Bringing the visual field closer, and if there are any further therapies and all. Okay, there is a link here for you to read more about it. And now you see all these initiatives here because, of course, we are changing the way we see, disabilities and what we thought about inclusion. So you see all of this now coming into, um, and how society is changing. Few more links to extend your learning. Okay, and thank you very much for listening. I hope it was helpful. We will look into each and every disability that we've spoken about in detail through our different units. Okay, if you come across something that you think is interesting, don't hesitate to please share it with your friends, not friends, your classmates here, okay, so that we can learn from each other. Yeah, thank you very much. Have a good evening and a good weekend. I will see you all